The morning sun hung low over Charleston, South Carolina, painting the cobblestone streets with a soft golden glow. In the heart of the city, the federal courthouse loomed, its white columns and arched windows a symbol of order and authority. For most, it was a place where justice was served. But for some, it was a battleground where power was wielded like a weapon, and dignity was a privilege, not a right. On this October day in 2025, a black woman named Judge Amara Thompson, 48, stepped out of her modest Toyota sedan, parked beneath the shade of a live oak draped in Spanish moss. She smoothed her tailored gray blazer, adjusted her glasses, and took a deep breath. Today was no ordinary day. She was set to preside over a high-profile police misconduct case that had drawn national attention. But before she could take her seat on the bench, she would face a violation so brazen it would unravel the very system she'd sworn to uphold. Amara's heels clicked against the courthouse steps, each step deliberate, her leather briefcase swinging lightly in her hand. She wore no judicial robe, never did outside the courtroom. To her, entering as a citizen was a quiet act of humility, a reminder that justice began with the people, not the title. Her silver-streaked braids were swept into a neat bun, a crown of resilience earned through years of navigating a world that often refused to see her worth. As she approached the glass doors, she noticed a group of protesters across the street, their signs reading "Justice for Jamal" and "End Police Brutality." The case she was about to hear involved officers accused of excessive force during a 2024 protest, and the city was on edge. Inside, the courthouse lobby buzzed with the usual morning rhythm: attorneys shuffling papers, clerks typing, security officers scanning bags. But the air shifted the moment Amara reached the security checkpoint. Deputy Carl Grayson, 52, a barrel-chested court bailiff with a reputation for his iron-fisted approach, stood by the metal detector. His pale blue eyes narrowed as she approached, his lips curling into a faint smirk. He didn't recognize her, and he didn't care to. To him, she was just another black woman, in a space where power was rarely hers. "Step out of line," Grayson barked, his voice cutting through the hum of the lobby. Heads turned. Amara paused, her expression calm but her pulse quickening. "Is there an issue, officer?" she asked, her tone even. Grayson crossed his thick arms, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "No ID displayed. You can't just walk into a federal building looking like you do." The words dripped with disdain, his gaze lingering on her braids, her dark skin, her quiet confidence. A younger guard, a white woman in her 20s, shifted uncomfortably by the X-ray machine, but said nothing. Amara reached into her blazer and produced her federal judicial credentials, the gold seal catching the light. "Here's my identification," she said, holding it out. Grayson snatched it, barely glancing at the badge before slipping it into his pocket. "I'll need that returned," Amara said, her voice firm but measured. "You in a hurry, sweetheart?" Grayson stepped closer, his tone mocking. The word "sweetheart" landed like a slap, and a few onlookers, a clerk, a lawyer, averted their eyes. "We've got procedures. Random checks. Let's go." Without waiting for a response, he gripped her upper arm, his fingers digging into her skin, and steered her toward a side hallway. The younger guard trailed behind, her face pale, but she didn't intervene. The hallway led to a small, windowless screening room, its walls stark and gray. A single metal chair sat in the center, flanked by a table, holding a scanner and a pair of gloves. The door clicked shut behind them. Amara's heart thudded, but her face remained a mask of composure. "I don't consent to this," she said clearly. "You have no legal grounds to detain me." Grayson smirked, pulling on the gloves. "Acting suspicious is grounds enough. Sit down." When she didn't move, he leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "You think that badge means something? Not here. Not to me." Two more officers entered, a wiry man in his 30s, with a shaved head, and a stocky woman, with a tight bun. The man grabbed Amara's wrist, twisting it slightly, as he forced her into the chair. "Let's make this quick," he muttered. Grayson picked up the scanner, but his eyes never left her braids. "Those could be hiding something," he said, his voice laced with malice. "We've had people smuggle contraband in hair like that." Amara's breath caught, but she kept her voice steady. "This is a violation. I demand your names." No one answered. Instead, Grayson motioned to the wiry officer, who began patting her down, his hands lingering longer than necessary. The female officer stood by the door, her eyes fixed on the floor. Grayson leaned closer, his voice low. You people always think you can walk in here like you own the place. Time to learn some respect. The pat down stretched on, each touch a deliberate humiliation. They rifled through her briefcase, tossing her legal pads and pens onto the table as if they were trash. Grayson held up a family photo from her wallet, a picture of Amara with her sister, Lena, and their late mother, and snorted. Nice try, but this doesn't prove anything. He dropped it to the floor, letting it land in a puddle of spilled coffee. Amara's fists clenched in her lap, her nails biting into her palms. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She sat there, her dignity under siege, as the officers laughed and mocked her. She'll think twice before strutting in here again, the wiry officer said, wiping his hands as if touching her had dirtied them. Grayson tossed her badge back onto the table. You're free to go. Courtrooms are that way, he said, pointing with a mocking grin. Amara rose slowly, her hands trembling only slightly. She retrieved her badge and the soaked photo, her movements deliberate. As she walked out, the officer's laughter echoed behind her, but in her chest burned a fire hotter than rage, deeper than humiliation. It was purpose. And in minutes, that purpose would turn the courthouse upside down. Because what Grayson didn't know was this: Amara wasn't a visitor, a defendant, or a lawyer. She was the judge, and she was about to take her seat. The hallway felt longer than usual, the polished marble floor reflecting the overhead lights like a distorted mirror. Amara's scalp tingled where the officer's hands had grazed her braids, and her arm ached from Grayson's grip. She passed a janitor pushing a mop, an older black man who met her eyes briefly and nodded, as if he sensed the storm brewing inside her. She didn't stop, didn't slow. Her destination was the courtroom, and nothing not Grayson, not the violation she'd just endured, would keep her from it. The double doors loomed ahead, the hum of voices filtering through. The police misconduct case was set to begin, a hearing that had already drawn reporters from CNN and the Washington Post. Amara was supposed to enter through the private chambers, slip into her robe, and emerge as the Honorable Judge Thompson. But today, decorum could wait. She pushed the doors open with both hands, the wood creaking under the force. The courtroom fell silent. Conversations stopped, pens froze, heads turned. Amara walked down the center aisle, her heels echoing against the marble. Her blazer was slightly rumpled, her braids still intact, but loosened from the rough handling. The gallery lawyers, journalists, plaintiffs, defendants stared in confusion. At the front, the judge's bench sat empty, the black leather chair waiting. Then it hit them. The woman they'd seen escorted through the lobby like a suspect wasn't a nobody. She was the judge. Amara stepped behind the bench, her movements slow and deliberate. She turned to face the room, her brown eyes sharp behind her glasses. The silence was suffocating. Grayson stood by the side door, his smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. He hadn't expected her to walk in here, not like this. Amara reached for her robe, folded neatly over the chair's arm. She didn't ask for help, didn't wait for ceremony. She slipped it on, the black fabric settling over her shoulders like armor. She turned to the court clerk, a young Latina named Sofia Rivera, 27. Is the docket ready? Amara asked, her voice steady. Sofia's hands shook as she nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Amara lowered herself into the chair, the leather creaking softly. She looked out over the room, her gaze sweeping past Grayson, past the attorneys, past the reporters scribbling furiously. We will begin with preliminary testimony on Case 24-871F, United States versus Charleston Police Department, she said, as if the last 20 minutes hadn't happened. Charges of abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations. All parties present. A chorus of yes, Your Honor echoed back. The attorneys shifted in their seats, some wide-eyed, others glancing at Grayson, who stood rigid, his hands twitching at his belt. Amara ignored him. For now, proceed, she said. The first witness was called a white officer named Lieutenant James Porter, 41, broad-shouldered and clean-shaven, with the polished demeanor of someone used to dodging accountability. He took the stand, swore the oath, and sat, his posture rigid. The prosecutor, a black woman named Aisha Coleman, 35, began her questioning. Lieutenant Porter, you were present at the protest on June 12, 2024, correct? Yes, ma'am, Porter said, leaning into the microphone. And you oversaw a team of 8 officers? That's correct. Did you authorize the use of force against protesters? Porter's eyes flickered to the defense table. I authorized non-lethal measures after the crowd became aggressive. There was shouting, pushing. Some had objects, bottles, signs. Any injuries reported from your team? Aisha pressed. None. MAAM. And the injuries to protesters? Minor. Bruises, scrapes. Amara's voice cut through before Aisha could continue. Lieutenant Porter. He turned to her, his confidence faltering. Yes, Your Honor. Do you consider a fractured skull to be a minor injury? The question hung in the air. Porter blinked. No, Your Honor. Of course not. Then why did your incident report describe the injury to a 19-year-old protester, Jamal Carter, as minor trauma consistent with crowd movement? Porter shifted in his seat. That was based on initial reports from my team. Initial reports from whom? Officer Daniels, I believe. And you reviewed and approved that language, knowing the victim was unarmed and required emergency surgery? A pause. Then, yes, Your Honor. Amara leaned forward slightly. Do you believe justice was served that day? The room was still. Porter cleared his throat. With respect, Your Honor, I followed protocol. That wasn't the question, she said, her tone unyielding. You may proceed, she added, nodding to Aisha. The testimony continued, each answer from Porter more guarded than the last. Amara listened, her pen moving across her legal pad, her face unreadable. From the corner of her eye, she saw Grayson inching toward the rear of the courtroom, his shoulders hunched. He looked like a man who knew his time was running out. He was right. After the second witness, Amara called a recess. The courtroom emptied slowly, whispers buzzing like static. She remained seated, her hands folded over the bench. Sophia approached cautiously. Your Honor, do you need anything? Amara shook her head. Just time, Sophia. Thank you. When the room was nearly empty, save for Sophia, 2 officers, and Grayson, Amara's gaze finally settled on him. Deputy Grayson, she said, her voice sharp as a blade. He froze mid-step, stepped forward. He obeyed, moving like a man walking toward a guillotine. Yes, Your Honor, he stammered. State your full name for the record. Carl Grayson. How long have you served as bailiff at this courthouse? 16 years. Amara tapped her pen against her pad. And in those 16 years, how many people have you subjected to unlawful searches in that screening room? Grayson's face paled. Your Honor, I didn't know who you were. That's not what I asked. Her voice rose, not in volume but in precision. How many complaints have been filed against you? I'm not sure. 14, Amara said, her eyes boring into his. 14 formal complaints, all dismissed, all buried, because you hid behind procedure. But today you made a mistake. You didn't just violate a citizen. You violated a federal judge in her own courthouse. The room was deathly quiet. Grayson's mouth opened, but no words came. Because of your actions, Amara continued, this courthouse, this supposed bastion of justice, has been tainted. And because you assaulted a federal judge, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation. Effective immediately. She turned to the officers by the exit. Escort Deputy Grayson to a holding area, separate from general population. Formal charges will follow. The officers moved swiftly, cuffs in hand. No, wait, Grayson shouted, his voice cracking. You can't do this. But she could. And she had. The courtroom felt different after Grayson was led away, the air heavier, the silence sharper. The ceiling fans spun lazily, their hum the only sound as staff exchanged glances. For years, Grayson had been a fixture, his authority unquestioned, his cruelty ignored. Now, he was gone, and the aftershock lingered. Amara sat back in her chair, her robe draped over her like a shield. There was no going back. Something had shifted not just in her, but in the room, in the courthouse, in the city itself. Sophia returned, holding a stack of notes. Your Honor, she said softly, the next witnesses are being prepped. We have about 10 minutes. Amara nodded, her gaze drifting to the empty gallery. The wooden benches would soon fill again with jurors, reporters, and onlookers, all waiting to see what she would do next. She could still feel Grayson's presence, his smirk, his hands, like a stain she couldn't scrub clean. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The door creaked open, and a young woman stepped inside Jada Lewis, 22, a courthouse intern with round glasses and a nervous smile. She clutched a folder to her chest, her braids tucked under a scarf. "Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something." Amara motioned for her to approach. "Go ahead, Jada." Jada closed the door and stepped closer. "I saw what happened this morning with Deputy Grayson. I was by the lobby desk, and I heard him. I heard what he said to you. I should have done something. I was scared." Amara studied Jada's trembling hands, her downcast eyes. "Thank you for telling me," she said gently. "That takes courage." "I didn't stop it," Jada said, her voice cracking. "But you're speaking now," Amara replied. "That's more than most." Jada straightened, her shoulders squaring. "If you need me to testify, I will." Amara reached across the desk, placing a hand over Jada's for a moment. "Thank you, Jada. I'll let you know." The doors creaked again, heavier this time. The public was returning. Amara stood, smoothing her robe. "All rise," Sophia called, her voice steadier now. The room obeyed, even those who hesitated, even those who had once laughed at Grayson's jokes behind closed doors. Amara resumed her seat. Court is back in session. The next witness was a black man named Marcus Evans, 47, a mechanic with calloused hands and a salt and pepper beard. He took the stand, his eyes hollow but resolute. Marcus was there to testify about his daughter, Kiara, 18, who had been pepper sprayed and tackled during the 2024 protest. She'd been marching peacefully, holding a sign that read, "Black Lives Matter," when an officer slammed her to the ground, fracturing her collarbone. Marcus's voice trembled as he spoke. "They told us she was resisting. She was screaming for help, and they said she was faking. No one listened." Amara listened now, her pen still. Marcus continued, describing how the officers had laughed as Kiara lay on the pavement, how they'd ignored his pleas for a medic. When the footage surfaced, it showed the truth, but no one was disciplined. "I just want to know someone cares," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "That my daughter's pain meant something." Amara leaned forward. "Mr. Evans, thank you for your courage. You've been heard." As Marcus stepped down, his shoulders a little lighter, Amara called another recess. In her chambers, she stood by the window, looking out at the growing crowd on the courthouse steps. Protesters chanted, their voices muffled but clear. No justice, no peace. Signs bobbed above their heads, one reading, "Protect Black Women." Amara's throat tightened. She thought of her mother, who'd worked as a seamstress in Charleston's poorest neighborhoods, teaching her to stand tall even when the world tried to make her small. That lesson had carried her through law school, through clerkships, through every microaggression in a field dominated by white men. And it carried her now. There was a knock. Sophia poked her head in. "Your Honor, the Point Use Attorney's Office just submitted a sealed motion. They want to escalate charges against Grayson federal civil rights violations." Amara nodded. "Accept it." As Sophia left, Amara sat at her desk, staring at the soaked photo from her wallet. Her mother's smile, Lena's laugh, they were her anchor. She tucked the photo into her briefcase and stood. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The courtroom was fuller now, the gallery packed with locals, activists, and reporters. Word of Grayson's arrest had spread, and the energy was electric. Amara stepped onto the bench, her presence commanding silence. "Court is now in session," she said, her voice clear. She turned to Aisha. "Call your next witness." The prosecution called Captain Robert Hayes, 45, a white officer with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl. He swore the oath and sat, his hands folded tightly. Aisha approached. "Captain Hayes, you were the commanding officer during the June 2024 protest, correct?" "Yes," Hayes said, his voice clipped. "And you approve the use of pepper spray and batons?" "Correct." The situation was volatile. Protesters were throwing objects. Were all protesters targeted, or specific groups? Hayes hesitated. "Those who posed a threat," Amara interjected. "Captain Hayes, body camera footage shows your officers targeting black protesters, while white protesters holding similar signs were allowed to pass. Can you explain that?" Hayes's jaw tightened. It was a chaotic scene, Your Honor. We acted on immediate threats." "Immediate threats," Amara repeated. "Like an 18-year-old girl with a cardboard sign?" The gallery murmured. Hayes shifted. "I wasn't aware of every incident." "But you signed off on the report that called her injuries minor," Amara said. "Did you review the footage before approving it?" A long pause. "No, Your Honor. Amara sat back. Proceed, she said to Aisha. The testimony dragged on, Hayes's answers growing more evasive. Amara's gaze never wavered, her notes meticulous. When the recess was called, the gallery buzzed. A woman in the back, a black activist in her 60s, mouthed thank you as Amara passed. In her chambers, Amara removed her robe and hung it carefully. The weight of it, the power, the contradiction settled in her bones. Without it, she was just a black woman, vulnerable to the same system she served. With it, she was unstoppable. There was a knock. A man in a gray suit stepped in, his demeanor calm but urgent. Judge Thompson, I'm David Carter with the DOJ's Office of Civil Rights. We're opening an investigation into this courthouse staff, misconduct, suppressed complaints, potential obstruction. What happened to you this morning is a Title 18 violation, and given your position, it's a priority. Amara unfolded the letter he handed her. Fast response, she said dryly. Carter nodded. The footage is spreading. Social media, news outlets. People are angry. I didn't do it for them, Amara said. That's why it matters, Carter replied. He paused at the door. Start with the supervisors who buried those 14 complaints. Then check the judges who signed off. Amara gave a faint nod. I will. When he left, she sank into her chair, the hum of the crowd outside filtering through the window. The fight was bigger now, and she was ready. The courthouse steps were no longer quiet. What began as a few protesters had grown into a sea of faces, black, white, young, old, holding signs and chanting. Justice for Amara, one read. End courthouse racism, another declared. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters from the New York Times and BBC squeezed into the back rows, their cameras banned but their notebooks open. Civil rights attorneys had flown in from Atlanta and DC, their briefcases stuffed with legal pads. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. Amara stepped onto the bench, the room rising instinctively. She tapped her gavel once. Be seated. The defense attorney, a white man named Paul Whitaker, 50 rose, his pinstripe suit crisp, his voice smooth. Your Honor, before we proceed, we request special counsel. Recent events, namely, the incident involving Deputy Grayson, may present a conflict of interest. Amara's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting that, because I was assaulted this morning, I can't fulfill my duties? Whitaker hesitated. I'm suggesting the perception of bias. Let me be clear, Amara interrupted, standing. I was humiliated, searched, and mocked, not for what I did, but for who I am. A black woman walking into a courthouse where people like your client assume I don't belong. And what did I do? I took my seat. I followed the law. I remained impartial, even when your client's colleagues laughed. She leaned forward. You want to talk about bias? Let's talk about a bailiff who targeted black women for years, knowing his badge would protect him. Let's talk about the judges who dismissed complaints to maintain order. Let's talk about your firm's history of defending officers who brutalize black communities. The gallery bristled. Whitaker opened his mouth, but Amara raised a hand. This court will proceed. I will not recuse myself. If you believe my rulings won't hold, file an appeal. I'll provide the forms. She tapped her gavel. Next witness. The prosecution called Lena Brooks, 55, a black woman with short graying hair and a sharp blazer. Lena had been the courthouse's records supervisor for a decade before retiring. She took the stand, her eyes meeting Amara's briefly. Aisha approached. Miss Brooks, during your tenure, were you aware of complaints against Deputy Grayson? Lena's jaw tightened. Yes, too many. 16 formal, dozens informal. What happened to them? They were buried. Some marked ere solved without investigation. Others vanished. Who gave those orders? Lena paused, then said, Judge William Carver. The name landed like a thunderbolt. Carver, 70, had retired 2 years ago, his reputation untarnished. He'd been Amara's mentor, the man who'd nominated her to the federal bench. Now, his legacy was crumbling. Why suppress them? Aisha asked. Lena's voice shook. He said it would destabilize the courthouse, that Grayson was necessary for handling certain types. The gallery stirred. Amara sat still, her pen frozen. She'd heard that excuse before, justice sacrificed for appearances. Lena continued, stronger now. I saw black interns searched daily. Black witnesses intimidated. Black families dismissed. I reported it once, early on, Carver told me. That's just how it is. I stayed quiet after that, but not anymore. Amara called a recess. As the room emptied, a young reporter whispered, "She's not just presiding, she's dismantling the system." He was right. This was bigger than one case, one bailiff. It was a purge. Outside, the crowd had doubled. Protesters sang spirituals, their voices carrying through the humid air. Amara stood in her chambers, looking out at the signs. "Amara Thompson is our voice." Her phone buzzed Lena, her sister, texting, "You're doing Mama proud. Keep going." Amara smiled faintly, then turned as Sophia entered with a visitor. Reverend Isaiah Coleman, 62, stepped forward, his gray suit worn but neat. "Judge Thompson," he said, his voice warm. "I won't take long. The community's out there. We see you. And we're with you." He handed her a folded paper. "These are names victims of Grayson, of others like him. They're ready to speak if you'll hear them." Amara unfolded the list, her eyes scanning the handwritten notes. Dozens of names, some with stories dating back decades. "How many are new?" she asked. "Most," Isaiah said. "Some were scared. Some were told it wouldn't matter. They were wrong," Amara said. "It matters now." Isaiah nodded. "Because of you." When he left, Amara sat, the list in her hands. These weren't just names. They were the people this courthouse had failed, but no longer. The courtroom filled again, the energy palpable. Amara took her seat, the room rising. The next witness was unexpected, a retired U.S. Marshal named Samuel Reed, 60, black, with a slight limp from an old injury. He'd worked in the courthouse from 2005 to 2013. He took the stand, his voice steady. "I saw Grayson's behavior escalate. It started with comments, slurs about black visitors, black staff. By 2010, he was targeting people. I filed a report. It disappeared." "What happened when you followed up?" Aisha asked. "I was told Grayson was valuable, that he handled problematic types. I left 2 years later." The silence ate at me. He looked at Amara. "Your Honor, what you did today sitting there after what he did, that's why I'm here." The room was still. Amara nodded, letting his words settle. Sometimes history didn't need a response. It needed space to breathe. The next morning, Charleston woke to gray skies and a restless energy. The courthouse steps were a sea of umbrellas, the crowd undeterred by the rain. Inside, Amara sat at her desk. A manila folder marked confidential before her. It had been left by a nervous administrator. Its contents explosive. 16 complaints against Grayson, all dismissed, all signed by Judge Carver. One memo stood out. From Carver to the head of security, Grayson's methods are unorthodox, but he maintains control, especially with certain demographics. Let it be. Amara's fingers tightened on the page. This wasn't just about Grayson. It was the system that had shielded him, endorsed him, let him grow bolder. She stood, the fire in her chest burning brighter. This was a war, and she was ready. The courtroom was standing room only. Law students, activists, and reporters packed the benches. Amara took her seat, her gavel tapping once. "Before closing arguments, I'm entering new evidence into the record." Sophia handed copies of the folder to both tables. "This includes all complaints against Deputy Grayson, their suppression, and the officials who enabled it." Whitaker tried to object, but Amara silenced him. "Sit down." She turned to the gallery. "This court will no longer protect institutions over people. Every signature in this folder is a choice to ignore victims, to shield predators, to uphold fear disguised as order. That ends today." A man in his 60s stood by the doorway. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Amara nodded. He stepped forward, his hands trembling. "I'm Henry Jackson. In 2009, Grayson slammed me against a wall for asking about my son's case. I filed a complaint. They said I tripped. I never came back, but I'm here now." One by one, others rose 10, 15, 20. Each had a story, each a silence broken. Amara watched, her heart full. The truth was rising, and it wouldn't be stopped. The final day of the hearing began with a downpour, the rain battering Charleston streets like a cleansing force. The courthouse was packed, the air electric. Amara walked in, pausing at the bench. She removed her robe, folding it carefully, and stood as herself a black woman, scarred but unbroken. "I've worn this robe for years," she said, her voice steady. I followed the law, delivered rulings, stayed silent when I shouldn't have. Today, I'm done with silence. She stepped forward. This court finds Deputy Carl Grayson guilty of abuse of power, civil rights violations, and official misconduct. I recommend a full review of every complaint filed against him and an investigation into every official who suppressed them. She turned to the court reporter. Put that on the record. She reached for a folder beneath the desk. This is the Thompson Mandate, a policy I'm instituting for all courthouse personnel in this jurisdiction. It mandates anti-bias training, psychological screenings, regular evaluations, and zero tolerance for discrimination. She held it up. I'll take this to the circuit, the judiciary, the Senate if I must. What happened to me should never happen to anyone. The gallery stirred nods, tears, hands clasped. Amara continued. This isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. To those who enabled Grayson, consider yourselves on notice. She tapped the folder. I'm forwarding recommendations for disbarment and charges to the DOJ for everyone complicit in this system. She looked out at the window where sunlight broke through the storm. One more matter. The side door opened and Grayson entered, cuffed, his face hollow. Amara faced him. Mr. Grayson, this court sentences you to the maximum penalties. 7 years for abuse, 5 for civil rights violations, 1 for obstruction. She paused. You thought your badge made you untouchable. You thought silence would protect you. You were wrong. As Grayson was led away, the room watched, not cheering, but witnessing. Amara closed the folder. Court is adjourned. The courthouse emptied slowly, people lingering, some touching the benches as if anchoring themselves to history. Amara sat in her chambers. The robe hung on her chair. Her sister, Lena, entered, carrying a small bag. She set up a stool behind Amara and pulled out clippers. Ready? She asked. Amara met her eyes in the mirror. Yeah. Lena worked gently, trimming the loosened braids, each pass a reclamation. Mama used to say our hair tells our story, Lena said. You're writing a new chapter. When she finished, Amara looked at herself bold, bare, strong. You could walk into any room like this, Lena said, grinning. Amara smiled. I plan to. That night, she left the courthouse, her head uncovered, the city lights glinting off her glasses. A small crowd waited. No cameras, just people. An elderly black woman, 75, approached, her hands trembling. I never thought I'd see someone like you do this, she said. Amara took her hand. You paved the way. A teenage girl stepped forward, her head shaved, and nodded. Amara nodded back, a silent bond passing between them. On her porch later, Amara stood, the oak trees swaying. Her phone buzzed news alerts, texts, but she let them wait. Tonight was for breathing. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. Staff nodded to her, some with pride, others with respect. A young security officer gave a shy thumbs up. In the courtroom, the gallery stood before Sophia announced her a first. Amara sat, the law moving forward, but the room had changed. Justice had a new face, and it didn't apologize. Months later, the Thompson Mandate spread. Other courthouses adopted it, cities called about it, Congress drafted a bill. Amara kept working civil cases, custody hearings, but each ruling carried a deeper purpose. One day, she spoke at a middle school, the room packed with kids holding signs. Be like Judge Thompson, a quiet girl asked. Do you still believe in the system? Amara paused. I believe in what it can be because of people like you asking that question. The White House called soon after. Amara received the Presidential Medal of Justice. Her sister, Sophia, Jada, and Reverend Isaiah in the front row. The quiet girl from the school sat in the back, her eyes wide. At the podium, Amara spoke. I wasn't supposed to be here, not because I didn't earn it, but because systems like this weren't built for people like me. But I stayed. I stood, and I made them see me. This medal is for every woman told to stay quiet, every man denied justice, every child who saw fear instead of hope. The applause was deep, respectful. Somewhere, in a prison cell, Carl Grayson watched the broadcast. The woman he'd tried to break now honored for her strength. The screen went black, but the truth lingered. Amara Thompson didn't just uphold the law. She redrew the line. She showed that justice isn't just punishment, it's accountability, courage, and the refusal to shrink. Her story reminds us that power comes from standing tall, even when the world demands you bow.